this is Avani from Hedgecraft Heirlooms, and I am here this week. We're going to be talking about practical offering magic. Real quick, while I'm waiting for folks to show up, before I even get into my pre-show, I'm just going to open up another window here so that I can see anybody who makes comments. Hey, MN2 Mama, this is my weekly live stream. We're going to be talking about practical offering magic here very shortly. Hey, Isabella, we're going to be talking about practical offering magic this week. If you want to throw a hashtag live into the comments, hashtag replay if someone's watching on the replay. I literally just opened this up, so I am just getting myself all sort of situated here, so bear with me for just a moment. Perfect. All right. Usually at this very beginning of my live streams, while I'm waiting for folks to show up, usually I kind of do a little bit of what I like to call a pre-show, just so we're not all kind of sitting around twiddling our thumbs, because that would be particularly unenjoyable. And in the pre-show today, I want to talk a little about why I'm even doing this topic this week. So tomorrow is actually a holiday. Hey, Brooke, here talking about practical offering magic today. I was just doing my kind of intro into why we're talking about this week. And it's because tomorrow is a holiday in the Hellenic or Greco-Roman calendar called Feralia, which is actually the culmination of a much longer festival, 9-day long festival, called Parentalia, which is actually is a Roman festival of the dead meant to help honor ancestors and ancestral spirits. It's actually a big part of what inspired our modern day Samhain. It's just people don't often talk about it because it's such a weird time of year by comparison of what we do in the modern world. Hey, Witchy in the Woods, we're here talking about practical offering magic. We're just talking about the holiday Feralia, which is tomorrow, and why we're talking about this. Hey, Michelle. Hey, Elle. We've got lots of fun people watching today. So Parentalia, it's a 9-day long festival. It starts on February 13th, and it ends tomorrow, the 21st. Hi. It's the most, most of the Greco-Roman festivals that were out there were actually really raucous, really, rambunctious, they were really crazy folk. We think about Lupercalia, we think about Bacchanalia, all these holidays where they were getting out there and having fun and drinking and doing all sorts of debaucherous things. But Feralia and Parentalia were one of the, or pretty much the only festivals in their kind of calendar that were very solemn. It was very quiet, it was very reserved by comparison. And because of that, not because of that, but probably as the reason being that the holiday was mostly celebrated by families and people who were, in their homes with the people that they loved, that they were close with. It wasn't a big public festival that people were having in the streets. But it was considered to be the sort of duty of the family's patron or patriarch to observe the holiday. Feralia specifically, which again is tomorrow, within the kind of spectrum of Parentalia as a whole, was actually intended specifically to make offerings to and placate even the spirits of ancestors or loved ones that might have not been the most friendly, that might have been a little bit malicious, that might have died under circumstances where maybe they had unfinished business with someone in the family. So the whole idea of Feralia was basically clear the air with spirits, that you weren't able to clear the air with while they were living. It was also considered a good opportunity to help strengthen family bonds. And the holiday as a whole was associated with the god Jupiter, who is the Roman equivalent of Zeus, if you're not super familiar. But associated with god Jupiter in his aspect as a subduer of enemies and oath breakers, just to kind of give you a feel for what this holiday was really talking about. But in the modern day, it's mostly celebrated by Hellenic witches, some Hecatean witches, and someone might be able to tell me because I'm not sure and I didn't get to fact check, possibly satanic witches, but I couldn't say that with any certainty. If anybody out there knows a satanic witch or observes it as a satanic witch, let me know. I would love to hear. Just as a reminder while I'm saying this to you, if you're watching, hashtag live. If you were here on the replay, hashtag replay. And as I like to always tell people, that this is not the Avani show, which is my name. I didn't actually officially introduce myself except for at the very beginning when no one was here yet. This is supposed to be interactive. I want this to be a conversation, so if you have questions or if you have comments, feel free to throw them below. I want to hear from you guys. Now, getting back to Feralia really quick. Some of the traditions that were really common in this holiday were things like having picnics at graves, or or I want to say cemeteries, because I don't know that they had cemeteries the way that we think of them today. But at the site of the graves where their family members or their remains were kind of interred or kept. And offerings usually were things, in the picnic offerings that they were giving were things like bread soaked in wine, grains, salt, flowers, specifically violets. I don't know why, I just know that that was a thing. And most often those offerings, those graves, at those graves and the picnics they were doing were usually done at midnight specifically, which is kind of another interesting parallel to our modern day Samhain celebrations. A lot of people kind of aim to do them at midnight, and that's a big part of why, I suspect. But it was believed on Feralia that, the spirits of the dead, or the shades, which is the word that they use a lot in the ancient poetry and stories, but that the shades, or the spirits of the dead, were believed to roam the earth, much like we think on Samhain. And on the day of Feralia, actually I believe it might have been all of Parentalia, but especially in Feralia, no deity worship took place, the doors of the temples were closed, and marriages and businesses doing business as usual was actually prohibited. So it was a very, very important holiday to the people. Hey Megan, I see that you're here. If you want to throw a hashtag live in the comments, if you're here on Instagram too, hashtag live in the comments, that'd be great. It helps the algorithm kind of reach its little fingers out and find other people that might like to watch with us. But that's what I have for the kind of pre-show, just kind of explaining why we're talking about offerings today at all. So let's get into what you came here for, which is practical offering magic. So one of the main thing I want to talk about today, obviously if you're here watching and you've been following my business for a while, you know that the main thing that I do is that I resell vintage antique items intended to be used as altar tools, ritual tools, altar decor, even home decor. Oh, thank you for that live comment. Very, very helpful. I appreciate that, you guys. Thank you, everyone. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do this week for this live stream, what I really wanted to focus on was that very, very specific item, items that can be used for making offerings, what objects you might use, what materials they come in, when you might want to use those different materials, what the different magical properties of those materials might be, which might play into your choices as well, and then even more. But I just wanted to kind of give you a little head start, introduction as to what we're going to be talking about. But the type of object or material of object that you might use for your offerings is going to depend on the type of offering that you're making. And there are a few common types of offerings that people make, and I think that I don't talk about the what of offerings in this video too much. Reason being that if you are on my VIP list, which you can join by visiting the link in my bio if you haven't already, my blog this past week was actually all about that, and I went into some significant detail, and you can find a lot more information there. And of course, if you don't want, you can also just plug it into your URL bar directly. Of course, it's hatchcraftheirlooms.com/blog is also the address. So you can go check that out if you want more information on the what of offerings. But the type of dish or bowl or plate that you might use for an offering is going to vary depending on the type of offering that you're making. If you're using offerings of food or herbs, obviously you're probably going to want to use a plate or a bowl. If you are doing food, herbs, or incense, you might, obviously a bowl or a dish also, but you might also want to use, again, for incense in particular, you would not want something that's too small, but like a lot of small plates can be really helpful for burning like cone incense on, or powdered incense, especially if it's that self-igniting powder that doesn't require a charcoal or anything. Some offerings that people like to make are things like flowers, fresh or dried. It depends on the circumstance and your particular beliefs and traditions. But obviously vases are really popular. What do you put the flowers in? What do you put them on? And then, of course, another common offering is, again, incense, or smoke, offering smoke. So obviously cauldrons or ashtrays or actual incense burners would be used in that situation. But the different materials that those items kind of generally tend to come in. And I actually have some examples here to show you real quick before I start showing things off. A few of these things are going to be in the drop that's actually coming tomorrow. So tomorrow, in honor of Feralia, I'm actually doing a shop update. It's a full 20 item update, so there's going to be a bunch of stuff that's hitting the shop. 3 of the things I'm going to show you here are actually previews of things that are coming in the shop this weekend. One of them is in the shop already. One of them is actually for my personal collection because I don't have any items in my shop that kind of match the description. But that said, let's get right into it. So the first item I want to talk about, or the first material I want to talk about, is brass. And this is one of the items that's going to be in the drop on tomorrow at 5 p.m. I believe. You can find the countdown for that in my stories if you haven't already turned it on. Brass as a material is associated with the sun because it resembles the color gold. A lot of the associations for brass are very similar to the associations for gold as well. So it's associated with healing and abundance, vitality, prosperity, and protection, also for protection magic as well. And if you're using brass, brass is usually ideal for indoor offerings, things that are being done at an altar or at a table. It could be done for an outdoor offering, but not anything that you're leaving out for anything more than, I would say, a single night, and that's assuming that night is very dry, because obviously left out to the elements, any metal, see what happens. Oh, it lets me do that. Ooh, I think I'm back. If I'm back and you can hear me and you can see me, please let me know in a comment. My phone just spent like a good 2 solid minutes of telling me that it wasn't going to cooperate with me. So if you can hear me and you can see me, let me know. Megan says, "No, I'm bad at tech." Yeah, I'm not awesome either, but oh yay, thank you, you see me. All right, so I was talking about brass. You didn't really miss anything. I kind of stopped talking when I saw that the connection was getting funny. But that brass is good for indoor offerings, altar offerings, things that are going to be outdoors in the short term. No, it was not UL, but thank you for hanging around. I appreciate your patience. But the item that I want to show you for this is going to be in the drop. That's tomorrow, and it's like the cutest little thing. So this is it here. It's a little brass. It sort of resembles those fireplace log racks that you see, but it's much tinier. My best guess, although I can't say with any certainty, is that this was probably dollhouse furniture. But it is solid brass, and you can see the really pretty detail of where the handle connects here. And I think that this would be a really lovely piece for like putting dried flowers on, or even crystals, or anything that you want to. But it reminds me of like a firewood basket or something that someone might bring into the woods with them to pick flowers with and go skipping through a meadow. But this is such a cute little guy. So this will be in the drop. That's tomorrow. So that's brass. I'm just going to put this over here for now. The next thing I want to talk about is silver. And if you've been following me for a while, you probably know that. And real quick, I just noticed that a couple more people joined me here on Facebook. If you're here watching me on Facebook, please put a hashtag live into the comments, hashtag replay if you're watching on the replay, especially because if you're on Facebook, Facebook doesn't show me who you are, and I want to say hello. So let me say hi and just put a little comment so I can see your name. Michelle up here says, "So cute, I have a bigger version I use on my firewood." Absolutely, that's exactly what it looks like to me. It was funny because I knew what it was for, but I didn't know what it was called, which of course what it's called is exactly what it's used for. I actually had to Google it to come up with the description for my Etsy because I wasn't sure. It's just called a log rack. But yeah, they're super pretty and super cute. But the next thing I want to talk about is silver. And again, if you've been following me for a little while, you must know that I love vintage, antique, silver-plated home decor. So a lot of the pieces that I have and that I use tend to be silver personally. Silver as a metal so we talk about brass. Brass is associated with the sun. Silver is associated with the moon. And that's because obviously if you look at the moon, it looks more silvery, and if you look at the sun, it looks a little bit more like gold because it's yellowish. The moon tends to be a little more white, so that's kind of part of the reason why that is. But the moon is generally associated with the powers of intuition, spirit communication, which is useful if you're doing things for offering magic, and nurturing, again, which I thought was a valuable thing to write down, because if we're talking about making offerings on ancestor work, obviously you tend to work with the spirits of people who have passed that you loved, that perhaps were once nurturing to you. So silver might be a valuable material to use for those kinds of offerings. And so this item I'm about to show you, Ella's going to lose herself here, her mind a little bit, because this is one of the pieces. It's a tray. So this is going to be in the update tomorrow, this beautiful oval silver-plated tray. And of course I have a filter right now, but believe it or not, the color in the filter is actually not terribly different from reality. There's a really beautiful patina on this piece, and I love a good solid natural patina. Like some people like to go and like polish the crap out of their pieces. I like never do that because I love when things look just a little bit careworn and pre-loved. Those are my favorite. But this little piece here, I don't know how well you guys can see the engraving on the inside. Oh yeah, that was a good shot. Really, really beautiful. So this little oval tray, and I had never really seen an oval one like this, which is why I snagged it. But this piece is going to be in the drop tomorrow as well. So if you like this, keep your eyes out. You'll be able to get it. Grab it tomorrow at 5. So that's silver. Next thing I want to talk about is glass or ceramic. I didn't write ceramic on my outline, but ceramic and glass, chemically speaking, are actually very similar. So glass in particular is usually associated with the element of earth, mostly because patina adds character, Michelle says. It sure does. I am all about it. So glass, especially if you're talking about clear, transparent glass, but really all glass, is generally associated with the element of earth because it is usually silicate based, which comes from sand, which is associated with earth. So glass especially, and ceramic to a degree, because it's usually white, is usually associated with purification and clarity. Also the amplification of energy, and grounding, again, because of its association with earth. So if those are things that relate to your offering, you might want to do glass or ceramic. Glass, generally speaking, can be suitable for either indoor or outdoor, especially if it's a really, really thick glass. Like there's a lot of vintage antique glass pieces that are like solid. Hey, medicine woman, here we're talking about practical offering magic today, talking about the types of things you might want to use to make your offerings in and where it's appropriate to do so, and what objects and materials have different metaphysical properties for planning purposes. We're talking about glass and ceramic right now. But glass and ceramic could be used for indoor or outdoor. A lot of antique vintage pieces have really thick, solid, sturdy glass, especially the bases. So again, for the short term, it might do okay outside. But glass in particular, if it's exposed to extreme temperatures, either really hot or really cold, it can be prone to breakage. And I found that out firsthand. One time I had this really cute bowl that I was using to burn. I was doing some smoke cleansing in it. And it was winter time, and it got the space I was in, it got to be a little bit overwhelming. It was too much smoke, and I was like, I'll put this outside real quick, and it happened to be winter time, kind of like now. So I took this very, very hot glass dish, and I put it outside to cool so it could smoke, and when I came back to it later, it was shattered. So you have to be careful with glass in that way. That's a pretty extreme example, but just so you know, glass isn't always great for burning because of its sensitivity to temperature. But the piece I'm going to show you to represent glass and ceramic is the ceramic piece specifically, and it's actually a piece that's already in my shop. It was part of I believe it was part of my vintage Valentine drop, and it's this really beautiful china ceramic glass. So you can see it has the roses on it and the really beautiful gold trim. I love pieces like this sort of like antique china. Especially for divination and scrying works, especially like tea sets are really lovely. But rose in particular is usually associated with love and beauty and sensuality. Pink roses are usually associated with friendship. So this could be a really lovely piece if you're making offerings for love magic, or trying to connect with a friend who's passed on, if we're talking about ancestors and working with the spirits of those who have passed. This particular piece in relationship to offering magic. So this is in the shop. This is not in the drop tomorrow. It's already in my shop. And again, if you're on my VIP list, on Sunday is going to be an actual Feralia sale. So we have a drop tomorrow and a sale on Sunday. This will, even though it's not in the drop, because you can be used as a dish, it will be in the sale. So if you like this piece, you'll be able to grab it then. Or you can grab it now if you don't want to wait because you're afraid someone else will grab it first. So that's there too. So that is glass/ceramic. The next one I want to talk about is wood. I don't tend to carry a ton of wood pieces in my shop because there aren't too many of them that kind of capture me. But I do have one really beautiful piece to show you today that's going to be in the drop tomorrow. Wood is usually associated with the element of earth, similarly to glass, because it comes from trees. Duh. To be fair, a lot of trees have different properties and are associated with different elements, but if we're talking about wood as a whole, I would say it's associated with the element of earth, and if you want to know more details about the type of wood and the properties of that particular wood, you'll have to do a little bit more research. I'm not the best at deciphering a type of wood just based on visual, but I'm sure that's a skill that somebody out there does have, just not me. But there are some woods in particular that are really commonly used in housewares and in decor that I thought I would talk about really, really quickly, just for your personal reference. The four I want to talk about here was acacia, maple, cherry, and walnut, which are really common hardwoods used for building and furniture and decor. Acacia wood is considered to be especially good for spirit communication. Again, we're talking about working with ancestor offerings, so that seems certainly like a useful property. It's also good for increasing psychic sensitivity and protection. All good things for making offerings and working with ancestors and spirits, non-corporeal beings, shall we say. Maple, which is really, really common. Maple is associated with spiritual healing and the acquisition of knowledge. I'm good. We're good. Sorry. My husband's checking on me because the baby, I don't know if anybody has been watching, but a couple weeks back, I actually had to, or maybe it was last week, I had to push one of my live streams really late because the baby fell asleep on me in the same room where I do my live streams, and the baby is actually currently asleep in this room where I'm doing the live streams, which I've never done before. So I think he was just trying to make sure that I was all set, which I am. He's still asleep. I put my weighted blanket over his bottom half and a light blanket over his top, so hopefully the light doesn't bother him. So he seems to be doing okay for now. So anyway, now that we can get back after that little segue, back to wood. And maple. Maple is really common. The third one, is cherry. I love the look of cherry wood. It's so pretty. Cherry is associated with grounding, stabilizing, insight, and overcoming obstacles. So especially if you're making offerings or petitions for helping to remove obstacles in some way, or if you're working with offerings with deities in particular, tend to be more used for that. Cherry wood in particular could be really, really useful to use. And then walnut is usually good for healing and focus. Now, wood in particular, most do fairly well outdoors, again, especially if it's in the short term. It can go probably a little bit longer than I would say a metal or a glass would, but certainly over time, wood will start to weather and look worse for wear. So in the short term, it can work out, but in the long term, wood is much better for indoor offerings on an altar or on a table. The piece that I want to show you that's wood, that's going to be in the drop tomorrow, is this beautiful carved wood vase. I mean, really. So this here on the sides, it looks to me like a hand holding incense. I'm not 100% sure. A hand holding incense, and then on these parts here we have these are cherry blossom trees and a crane. And I have to look at it. I think I actually have it over here. I had to look up hey, Flance Breeze, we're here talking about practical offering magic today. Oh, good, it's right up top. And I looked up the symbolism of those things because I just like to do that for my listings in general, and I was kind of a little bit mind blown by how on the nose it was for what I was putting this on the occasion that I was uploading this for. But cherry blossoms are actually believed in the Japanese culture in particular to represent the souls of fallen warriors, and cranes often represent longevity and long life. And I was like, whoa, that is crazy that those two things would be together on this vase that I'm uploading as an offering drop for Feralia. So this would be a really beautiful piece for making offerings of flowers, dried or fresh, for an ancestor or for anybody who was perhaps a veteran or currently in the military, or even magic for, I would say, justice or karma as well, or war. This is a really, really amazingly beautiful piece. So that'll be in the drop tomorrow. If you love it, keep an eye out. That'll be tomorrow at 5. So that was wood. I've got 2 more, and then we'll get into the last things. And this is going a little long because I just get so excited about these pieces, I can't help but blab about them. So the final material I want to talk about that I have an example of, the last one I don't have an example of because it's kind of seasonally related, is stone. Stone, again, in general, is associated with the element of earth because it comes out of the earth. But like wood, obviously, each type of stone has different properties associated with it. So like wood, I have a few different types of stone that I figured I would specifically mention that are commonly used for making housewares that you might actually come across and use. The first being banded onyx, which is, I think, actually also called, it might also be a type of calcite, but I'm not sure. I think the banded onyx might be a trade name, but don't quote me on it. But it's generally associated with happiness, good fortune, and strength of the heart. which is especially appropriate because, and this piece I'm going to show you, this is one that's my personal piece, so I don't have any more pieces that are previews, but this is actually a mortar from a mortar and pestle set that we have, but it is banded onyx. And you can see it has kind of a greenish tint to it, so it would make a sense that they would associate it with the heart and the heart chakra, especially if it has that tint to it. Another really common stone that you find used for making bowls and plates and what have you is soapstone. Soapstone is considered to be a soothing, balancing, and calming stone. Granite is also really common. Granite is associated with abundance, assimilation of beliefs, cleansing, protection, and also for banishing skepticism or doubt. I felt inclined to include that banishing skepticism thing, so I'm assuming that someone out there will find that interesting and useful. So there you have it. And then the final stone I wanted to talk about is marble. Marble is associated with clarity, protection, inspiration, and mastery of thought. And so stone in particular, I would say, is pretty much your absolute best bet for any offerings that you want to make outdoors. It is the least likely to be affected by the weather, by moisture. That said, right before I started this live stream, when I was gathering my example pieces, I almost grabbed a different bowl of mine, which is actually selenite. And that's relevant because there are actually some stones out there that really cannot and should not be exposed to moisture, and selenite is one of them. It will get damaged from exposure to moisture. So I should say most stone is going to be safe for outdoor. Banded onyx or soapstone or any of the stones that I mentioned would absolutely be safe. Like if it's made for food prep or food storage or food serving, it'll probably be safe for outdoors. Selenite, the selenite bowl I bought at like a little witch shop, and like I keep crystals in it because it cleanses them. That's a whole other topic, but so that's stone is another great material that you can use too. And the final object or the final material that I want to talk about that is I don't have an example of are leaves. I know you're like, leaves? What is Slade talking about? This is crazy. Hey, Whitney, we're talking about practical offering magic today. We're talking about the items and materials that you might use and why you might want to use them. But I'm actually just wrapping up. The last item I wanted to talk about was using leaves. So we're talking like those big broad leaves that some trees have. You can actually use those as platters for putting things on. I love that idea because it's so biodegradable. It's not something that's going to be outside that you have to worry about taking back inside or getting ruined. And it will just kind of return to the earth with all the offerings that you create as well. Some leaves that might commonly be used for that is banana or plantain leaf. And you could buy a lot of those types of leaves at especially like Mexican grocery stores because people use them for wrapping tamales. But it's associated with creating change and resilience and luck. Those particular leaves. Another type of leaf, and I know I can find this locally, I can't speak to where everybody who is watching is, but catalpa trees have these really big, broad, kind of heart-shaped leaves, and these giant beanstalk things that grow on them. Can also be a wonderful platter to use. Catalpa is associated with magic, as in like the magic beanstalk. A lot of people associate them, catalpa, with the magic bean. So magic in general, the unbelievable and strength through flexibility. Another broadleaf that, again, I know that you find local to where I am, and if you're lucky, you might have access to, because a lot of it is commercialized, but tobacco. Tobacco has really beautiful broadleaves as well, like huge leaves. But it's considered actually to be a traditional offering plant by a lot of indigenous people. It might be, I've heard some, I had recently in my Facebook group, we had a big upset about cultural appropriation and closed practices. That's kind of a big hot button issue in general right now. And somebody suggested that the use of tobacco ritually might be a closed practice. So do your research before you decide to do that thing. That may or may not be the case. I haven't heard that other than that one instance. But I heard it one time, so it could be a thing. But yeah, tobacco is wonderful. I love tobacco in general. And then the final leaf that you might want to use is oak. There are some oak leaves that get to be really beefy. We have some of those trees near us that get really crazy big, and you see these giant like leaves falling in the fall, and you're really afraid that you're gonna get injured. Possibly, they're so big. But oak is associated with strength, fastidiousness, and protection. So those are some leaves that might be local to you that you could potentially use for offerings as well. So, but that said, once you have your offerings and you figured out what kind of plate you want to use and what object you want to use, where do you leave your offerings? The most common places to leave offerings are, if we're talking about ancestors and getting back to our kind of main theme of Feralia, you might leave your offerings at a grave or on a gravestone, tombstone. If you have an altar that is dedicated to your ancestors, obviously that would be a great place too, or really any altar. So if you have just one general altar without a specific ancestor altar, you could certainly put it on that as well. Of course, if you have outdoor places you can leave offerings, that's an option too. The most common place outdoors that you might want to leave an offering is, of course, in the woods if you live near the woods, or at a crossroad. Now, just a real quick note about crossroads, because when I learned this, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And just real quick, because I look like I have some new people on Instagram and on Facebook, if you want to throw a hashtag live into the comments, that'd be great, just so I can see your name, so I can say hello, and help the algorithm find other people to watch. Hashtag replay if you're watching on the replay. But crossroads, really quickly, because when I learned this thing, I thought it was like, I was like, wow, how did I never know this thing? But when people talk about leaving an offering at, hey, Sage Quartz in the Moon, we're here talking about practical offering magic today, talking about the idea of leaving offerings at a crossroads. So a crossroads, when you hear the word crossroad, you often assume it's an X. But a crossroad in the traditional sense is actually a T, which is way more helpful. Like if you like I'm using my yard as an example because I think it's easiest for me to relate to in a way. But if you have a wooded backyard that has a path that goes into it, that is actually a T. So an offering left at a trailhead like that can be a really great place to leave an offering to. And then one of the most obvious examples of a crossroad where you could leave an offering, assuming that you live somewhere where you feel comfortable doing this, is at the end of a driveway. That's a T. It's a natural T that most people have access to. So that's another place that you could try. You know, if you're leaving out a food offering that you think an animal's going to come by and probably snag anyway, if you put that type of offering at the end of your driveway, no one's probably going to see it anyway. But of course, everybody's comfort level is different. But that said, after you leave your offering, after you've put it out, what do you do with it? I see that question in groups all the time. How long do I leave it there for? What do I do with it afterwards? Obviously the food is actually still there. How do I handle this? And here's the answer to that question before anybody gets around to asking me. So I'm going to anticipate your question here. If you're using fresh food, that should generally be disposed of the next day. How do you dispose of the food? Obviously, it's ideal to put it on the earth, in the ground, compost it, or obviously if animals get to it, all the better. But you never want to eat that type of offering food. That's considered to be very bad juju, because the idea is that when you leave the offering, the essence of the food is taken, even if the physical food is left behind, so you don't want to touch it as far as to try to eat it yourself. Megan says here that she leaves an offering under a tree that leads to the field behind her house. That's perfect. That is actually technically, I don't even think she did it intentionally, but I know what her property looks like. We're personal friends. But that's basically a crossroads, so we're totally intuitively doing it right, which is super fun when it works out that way. Herbs, especially if they're dried, can be left on an altar as an offering for much longer because obviously there's no concern of spoilage. Usually I would say 3 to 7 days. If you're doing offering work and you're doing it on a regular basis, you might want to consider thinking about leaving it there for a number of days based on your magical intention. Common numbers of days include things like the number 3 for manifestation, or the 7 as to represent wisdom, or even 8 representing like the wheel of the year and the solar cycle, or 13 days because number 13 is sacred, although that's a little bit of a stretch in my opinion for anything that's potentially edible, unless it's on the ground out somewhere and you're not worried about it going bad. Flowers, of course, can be left to hung and dried, or they can be burned or buried. An ash form incense should generally be cleaned out when the burning is complete or the next day. And it can be buried or thrown into a natural running water source as well, and it will get returned to the earth as dirt. And that's what I have for offerings today.